In the wake of yet more criticism of Victoria's police corruption watchdog, the government has announced new laws to increase scrutiny of just whose telephone calls police can listen into. It's one step towards the government's promised anti-corruption commission, which is now 4 months overdue. The minister responsible for setting it up is Andrew McIntosh. Minister, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Josie.
You've announced your public interest monitor, an extra layer of scrutiny to decide who gets their phone tapped. Yesterday you said that body will take instructions from you. You then had to retract that statement in Parliament. What happened?
I think I was asked who paid the PIM, and I made a clear mistake. The reality is the PIM is a governor in council appointment, and the terms and conditions of the PIM will be part of that governor in council appointment. The most important thing is the PIM will be completely independent of government, have no direct accountability apart from serving or filing or tabling an annual report each year, which will go through the minister, and I will table it annually. And that's the only circumstance there would be any engagement with the PIM at all from government.
But you seem to have a pretty clear view when you first asked the question, and you repeated it a few times, that you would be, either or the state government would be responsible. Yeah. They would for the PIM to ultimately answer to.
I think I said, I might be as the minister and then the department. It's a clear mistake, Josie.
So it was a mistake in terms of what you were being asked?
It was a mistake that I made, and the fact is it's clarified now. The reality is it's a governor and council appointment. The terms and conditions were part of that appointment, like all statutory office holders, and they were completely independent of government, just like the Ombudsman, just like the Auditor General.
Do you feel it damages your credibility? You are the man setting up the anti-corruption body, and you were forced to retract your comments in Parliament.
Embarrassing, but no.
How will it actually work? Does the judge still ultimately make the decision on whether or not an application is granted?
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, of course, there are two lines. Of course, there are telephone intercepts which have to go before a federal court judge or a federal member of the AAT. Alternatively, other things like surveillance devices, state-based, they go before a Supreme Court judge or a magistrate. So there are two jurisdictions effectively, and of course to get the PIM involved in the telephone intercepts will require the agreement of the Commonwealth, and I've certainly had the benefit of talking to the Federal Attorney General and informing him of our intention and intend to work very closely with the Federal Attorney General and his office to get this done as quickly as possible.
Well, I was going to say we're still waiting on the Commonwealth in terms of establishing your legislation for the Anti-Corruption Commission. Is this going to add another layer of delay?
Well, I don't think it's going to add another level of delay in relation to the anti-corruption, the independent broad-based anti-corruption commission legislation we're proposing to introduce. Certainly there'll be some delay in relation to the PIM to get and obtain that consent from the Commonwealth to enable them to to test the merits of those applications in relation to telephone intercepts, but it certainly won't delay the legislation in relation to IBAC.
So there'll be a separate wait, though, for the PIM legislation?
Well, in relation to the PIM legislation, there may be some time. I'm unable to say that is really dependent upon us second reading the legislation, passing it through the House and indeed getting the consent of the Commonwealth.
And what's the latest news on the Commonwealth's involvement on your IBAC laws? Because clearly they were meant to be in place by July, the 1st of July. That's long missed that deadline. When will...
Well, I mean, the Commonwealth isn't the reason or cause. It's just one of the parts of the complexity. The reality is IBAC is a significant piece of legislation. It's a significant reform of our very creaking and antiquated integrity and anti-corruption mechanisms we have in this state. We've had to live with it for 11 years under Labor. The reality is that we make no apology for getting the model right. We have to get it right.
But when will it be up and running?
Well, as soon as the legislation is before the House, and as the Premier committed in April of this year, we will have it before the House before the end of the year.
Do you think it will actually be operating before at all next year?
Well, hopefully it'll be operating as soon as possible. Of course, it will require passage through both Houses of Parliament.
We've heard this week that Victoria's court systems are getting more and more overloaded. Do you think your crime prevention portfolio is actually doing anything?
Well, certainly my crime prevention portfolio is a very interesting one. The reality is that I've spent a lot of time going around Victoria, from Mildura to Warrnambool to Bairnsdale and a lot of places in between, talking to local communities. I've had a number of regional reference groups set up in relation to crime prevention to get local communities directing themselves as to what are the issues in relation to crime, certainly what they propose to do about it and what we can do to assist. And certainly it's very clear that there are 4 big issues that this state faces in relation to crime prevention, and there are issues relating to mental health, there are issues relating to substance abuse, there are issues relating to family violence and indeed the lack of stable housing.
On family violence, police have said a quarter of assaults each year are directly related to domestic violence. There's been a 30% increase in intervention orders in the past 5 years. Where is your family violence strategy?
Well, certainly the government is committed to ensuring that women and their children are safe in their homes. The reality is, family violence is a significant scourge upon our community, and we are doing everything in our power to try and address that.
Is that the case? I mean, you don't seem to be...
Certainly there are a number of projects, Josie, being rolled out across this state, not directly attributable to my portfolio, in Mary Woolwich's portfolio, Women's Affairs, and indeed in housing. There are something like $50 million worth of projects being rolled out across the state.
Minister, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.